It seems that the rules of engagement, how we relate to each other in the workplace, in social situations, and even at home, have been in a steady state of decline over the past several years. Our next guest's life work is to get us to snap out of it and pay attention to each other. Anita Nowak is an award-winning educator at McGill University, a sought-after speaker internationally, and the author of the forthcoming book, The Empaths Strike Back. Certified as a personal and professional coach, she mentors social entrepreneurs and advises social purpose organizations. Welcome to our Montreal.
Thanks for having me.
So you specialize in what you call empathic action. What is that?
So empathy, of course, is the innate trait that we share as humans and allows us to share our common humanity. So empathic action is acting on that capacity. And the idea behind empathic action is to do good in the world, to help others so that the world is more sustainable and equitable.
So what's an example of an empathic action that we can do?
So, for example, around this time of the season, holiday season, being kind to people who are in the service industry is huge acts of empathic action. But in the middle range of that, I've got examples of, a 9-year-old girl who raised money at school to send girls in the global south to school. There are organizations that are doing empathic action collectively. There's plenty of examples that abound.
Okay. And you say that we have a political need to embrace empathic action now.
Well, if you think about climate change, there's going to be huge suffering. Already there's suffering. We're seeing mass migrations of people and refugees. That's going to get worse. And the storms and the climate change realities is going to cause a lot of people pain and suffering. So we have got to start engaging in more empathy for one another as a way of sort of curtailing that.
We're just seeing so much pushback against that, though. Like I don't even know where to begin with some movements and some people who just don't want to understand it. They don't want to have anything to do with it. It's the fear of how that's going to affect their lives, and they can't even start to be empathetic yet.
Yeah, and the problem is social media is creating these echo chambers, so we're hearing a lot of what we want to hear, and listening to counterpoints and other people's perspectives is becoming increasingly difficult. And the younger generation that's growing up in their own algorithms of echo chambers are really facing an uphill battle in terms of understanding where someone else is coming from. That's why the first step to create more empathy between people is to listen with an open heart and really try to understand what somebody else is experiencing.
Your new book your upcoming book, I should say, is entitled The Empaths Strike Back. Who are some of the people that you're writing about?
So I call it a book about everyday heroes using empathy to change the world. And I look at individuals who are using empathic action. I look at families, communities, schools, and organizations. But it is also a call to action for political change, and it's also a spiritual call to action because, as it turns out, engaging in empathic action really benefits us as human beings. It benefits our physiology and our spiritual health.
Well, and it's funny that we have even politicized empathy. And if you are empathetic towards one group, that means you're affiliated with one left or right, and another one, then you're definitely left or right. We've even politicized empathy. Where do you go from there?
Yeah, it's getting tough. I mean, if you look south of the border in particular, I'm a little nervous about my book coming out because I will automatically be put into a camp when I'm really looking broadly at let's create a better world for all of us. But I think that's a real problem. Neighbors are not speaking to each other. The holiday season is coming. I can't even talk about politics with my own dad anymore because of the TV shows and network that he watches. So it's becoming increasingly difficult.
And another thing that's sort of getting in the way of that are anxiety disorders, because they are now at an all-time high. How does that affect our ability to empathize with one another?
Yeah, so on average, the numbers are about 4 to 5 hours adults are spending on their phones per day. And with youth and teenagers, that number goes even higher. And you're seeing increased rates of self-harm, anxiety, and depression. Suicide rates are going up. And so there's a whole host of really problematic results, as given that the smartphones are so dominant in our lives, and that's why it's really, really important to just be able to put them away once in a while and unplug from our electronics.
Well, that being said, I'm painting a very dark picture of not being able to be empathetic or to act on empathic action, but it is possible, and people are doing it.
Yeah, I remember when I was doing my PhD and studying empathy a little bit better, I would try all these different experiments. And one day I remember being at the American Express at Place Ville Marie in the lineup around this time of year. This was about 6 or 7 years ago, maybe 8 or 9 even. And the woman, when I finally got to her at the counter, was extremely, extremely rude to me, like completely unnecessarily rude. And, you know, under the circumstances, the client can ratchet it up and I could have one-upped her. But I actually, having studied empathy, thought, you know, this is a chance for me to engage in a little empathic action. So I just asked her, I said, how are you doing? Is everything okay? And she stopped and she burst into tears. She says, been working, you know, 2 shifts for the last couple of weeks. She's sick. She's got a child at home sick. And we literally embraced. Like, I went out and I bought her a little tea and came back. And it was just a moment of just recognizing that we share a common humanity. And we're going through this thing called life, you know, with all the ups and downs and trials and tribulations thereof. So
Imagine if more people did that.
exactly.
You teach at McGill University courses in leadership as well as social entrepreneurship. So what is social entrepreneurship for those who haven't heard of it?
So entrepreneurship is creating a business to meet a need and selling either products or services on the marketplace. We know that. Social entrepreneurship uses all of the skills and talents that an entrepreneur would, but the purpose of the organization is to solve a social or environmental problem.
Okay. And we're seeing a huge growth in that, and especially I feel like I'm hearing more about it in Montreal. Why do you think we're seeing such an uptick in the people and businesses and startups that want to do this?
Well, first of all, I think we realize that the system needs to change. And the young millennials and Gen Zs that I'm teaching now, they recognize that the world that they're going to inherit, we'd better get onto this sooner rather than later. And for them, it is aligned with their values. They want to create a more equitable and sustainable world. So having social enterprises, you know, fill up more space in our society makes sense to them.
You also mentor young people, and there's so much uncertainty about their future. What are you seeing in them?
Well, one of the things I've come to know after about a decade teaching young people is that they're really confident and they're uber connected socially on social media. But if you scratch just below the surface, they have so much anxiety about their futures. Even themselves, I think there's a certain degree of insecurity because they're constantly bombarded with messages that they're not good enough, and they're always seeing their friends, and there's this fear of losing out, or everybody's having a better life than them. So I feel that there's a craving for human connection, authentic, vulnerable, like, you know, up close and personal. So I try to create a space in my classroom where we have the chance to see each other beyond classmates and we see each other as complex human beings. And that's one of the joys I get from teaching.
What advice do you have for people who are just starting out in their careers?
The first thing is, even before they start as a career, in their career, is to ensure that they're doing something that is aligned with their values and it's something that they can feel proud about doing, because then it's not going to feel like work to them. I think so many of them have a certain, you know, a dozen kind of core career choices that they feel are the right track for them. And to feel pressure to be an accountant or a lawyer or a doctor is a little bit overplayed, I think, when there are so many other ways of being in the world and contributing that would be so much more meaningful to them. So that's the first bit of advice I would offer.
So you talked a lot about sort of stepping away from social media, not having that influence your life. What are some of the daily habits that you've incorporated to sort of get away from that pressure?
Yeah, well, it's easy to be addicted, right? I mean, don't we all in the middle of the night, even if we're going to the washroom, check our email? I had the good fortune when I was on maternity leave to live outside of Canada with my husband and daughter, and we lived a really, really simple life. And when I came back, I recognized just how toxic it is to live in a culture that demands so much of you 24/7. So my husband and I have a practice where we wake up at 5 in the morning on Mondays through Fridays before our daughter wakes up, and we journal, and I do some yoga. We look at our vision board. We do a lot of reflection practices, contemplative mindfulness practices, and that just reminds us that we can slow down. We can swim upstream from what society expects of us.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned waking up at 5 a.m. because that doesn't sound like slowing down. That sounds like getting the day started a bit earlier. But you're going to bed not at
9.
midnight. You're going to bed at 9.
At 9.
Right.
Yeah. So there are some things that we miss out on as a result, right? I'd like to finish, all the emails in my mailbox, but we put Annika down to sleep, and we fall asleep shortly thereafter, and that gives us the fuel for the next day.
Listen, if you're a parent, you probably do want to go to sleep anyway when your kid goes to bed, so
You're right.
that's probably not too far off the track. Now, there's something you do at parties with your students, and at parties and with students, rather, to help them connect with each other, and it takes 3 minutes. What is it?
So I think you're referring to public narratives. It's a communication and leadership tool that I learned from Marshall Gans at the Kennedy School at Harvard. And basically, it's storytelling where you describe something that you care about personally, you invite people to care about it collectively, and you invite them to act on it purposefully. And so students in my class are asked to tell a story about something like a social issue that they care deeply about, and they have 3 minutes to do that in the me, we, now kind of format. And what ends up happening is all the students share stories of what's going on in their lives, things that have happened to them, whatever they're willing to share. It's not a confessional, so this is not like group therapy session. But what happens is that students start to see that they can relate to one another in the classroom beyond just the veneer of just that's my classmate that I know from 2 classes. And it really changes the dynamic of the room because people start to trust each other and feel more vulnerable to talk about their feelings in the class. So I love to do that.
Well, that's something we can all do, I think, maybe at our next dinner party in the new year. What are you taking into 2019 and leaving behind in 2018?
I am looking forward to the new year to start a practice of daily yoga, that's for sure. I want to finish my book. I also want to be really present for my daughter. I know that she goes to daycare and I see her for a few hours at the end of the day, and it's just easy to get into the cooking and just getting things done in the household routine. And I don't want to have her sit down with an iPad, so I really want to be present for her. So that's a very important resolution for me in the new year. And on January 1st, my husband and I always do a vision board together, so we're going to piece together what our dream 2019 looks like.
Couple goals, I like that.
Yep.
Thanks so much, Anita.
Pleasure.